Greetings, lore seekers, and welcome back to the LORELORD. Before we begin today's deep dive, I want to give a special acknowledgement to Zogroroth 666, a friend of the channel and dedicated lore connoisseur who provided extensive research and materials for this video. His insights into the darker aspects of Malcador's character have been invaluable in crafting this narrative. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, when humanity speaks of its saviors, they speak of the Emperor, the master of mankind, the Lord of Terra, the immortal God-King who united humanity under his golden banner. But behind every great man, they say, stands an even greater one pulling the strings. His name was Malcador the Sigillite, the First Lord of Terra, the Emperor's closest friend and confidant, the man who founded the Administratum, the Inquisition, and the Grey Knights, a psyker second in power only to the Emperor himself and perhaps Magnus the Red, a figure who lived for over 6,700 years and remembered his date of birth to the second. But here's what the imperial histories don't tell you. Malcador may have been the most dangerous man who ever lived. Not because of his psychic power, though that was formidable, but because of what he knew, what he'd done, and what he was willing to do to ensure humanity's survival. Today, we're peeling back the layers of propaganda and official history to examine the truth about Malcador the Sigillite, a man whose confessions drove his confidant to suicide hundreds of times, who orchestrated manipulations that would doom billions, and who may have committed atrocities so terrible during Old Night that even millennia later, his true name remains a curse. Let's begin with perhaps the most explosive revelation about Malcador, his true identity, discovered by Horus Lupercal during the War Master's investigation into the Sigillite's past. According to Jagatai Khan, who warned Malcador before the Siege of Terra, Horus had uncovered the truth in his libraries aboard the Vengeful Spirit. The Sigillite's real name was Brahm al-Khadour, last of an ancient order known as the Sigillites, a group that sought to gather and preserve the greatest and most powerful artifacts in human history. But that's not all Horus discovered. Brahm al-Khadour was a perpetual, an immortal being who could not die of natural causes. He was known in ancient legends as the Cursed Wanderer, and during the Age of Strife, that terrible period known as Old Night, when humanity's empire collapsed into anarchy and horror, Malcador committed what Jagatai Khan described as great atrocities. Quote from the Last Council, "He told me that you are Brahm al-Khadour, last of the Sigillites, the Cursed Wanderer, the Perpetual. Horus knows what you have done, the atrocities that you and your secret order heaped upon mankind during Old Night. There are some legends that even you could not erase, some texts that the last and greatest techno-mage of Terra could not burn. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Malcador neither confirmed nor denied these accusations. When confronted by the Khan, he prepared himself for possible combat, considering whether he still had the psychic strength to subdue a Primarch. But he never said, "That's not who I am." He never said, "Horus is lying." Instead, at the end of their conversation, Malcador said something profoundly revealing. "I have to be able to believe, when all else is done, that should they so wish, even the greatest monsters of our time can yet be redeemed and forgiven." Was he speaking about Horus? About the possibility of a traitor Primarch's redemption? Or was he speaking about himself, a monster from Old Night who had found redemption in service to the Emperor and the Imperium? The evidence suggests the latter, because we know from other sources that Malcador carried terrible burdens. he created Ael Wyntor, an Eldar-human hybrid clone, specifically to have someone he could confess his secrets to. Someone who wasn't an echo of his own voice. And those confessions were so horrifying, so unbearable, that Wyntor killed himself. Hundreds of times. Let that sink in. Malcador's confessions, the things he'd done, the secrets he carried, drove an Eldar-human hybrid with formidable emotional strength to commit suicide hundreds of times over. Each time, Malcador would clone him again, need a confidant again, confess again, and watch as the psychological weight of those confessions drove Wyntor to self-destruction once more. According to Malcador himself, hundreds of you, seeking death rather than live with what I told them. Another secret I kept. What kind of secrets could be so terrible? What atrocities did this man commit during Old Night that even an Eldar consciousness couldn't bear knowing about them? The origins of the Imperium as we know it began with a meeting between two extraordinary beings. Malcador encountered the Emperor when he was just another Terran warlord, albeit an extraordinarily powerful one, fighting to unite humanity's cradle world during the Unification Wars. What's remarkable is that it was Malcador who convinced this warlord to take on the title Emperor. Think about that for a moment. The man who would become the master of mankind, the being with godlike psychic power and vision spanning millennia, was convinced by Malcador to embrace the role of Emperor. This tells us something crucial about their relationship. Malcador wasn't just a servant or advisor. He was a partner, an equal in some ways, despite the vast gulf in their power levels. The Emperor trusted Malcador's counsel enough to base fundamental decisions on it. According to Malcador himself, by the time of the Horus Heresy, he was over 6,700 years old. The Emperor is significantly older, perhaps tens of thousands of years. This means Malcador lived through much of human history, witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and accumulated knowledge that would be invaluable to someone trying to unite humanity. Their partnership worked because they complemented each other. The Emperor provided the vision, the raw power, and the ultimate authority. Malcador provided the administration, the ruthless pragmatism, and the willingness to do things that even the Emperor might balk at. As the Emperor's primary representative, Malcador essentially ran Terra while the Emperor focused on the Great Crusade. He founded the Administratum, the vast bureaucratic machine that would eventually consume the Imperium in red tape, but initially allowed for unprecedented coordination across a planet-wide civilization. He established systems of governance that would outlast their creators by 10,000 years. But more importantly, he established the secret systems, the intelligence networks, the assassination protocols, the contingency plans for threats that official imperial doctrine didn't acknowledge existed. Malcador was the man who dealt with problems that couldn't be solved with bolters and battleships. He was the Emperor's shadow, working in darkness so the Emperor could shine in the light. Now we come to perhaps the most controversial and disturbing revelation in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore. Malcador's confession about the true purpose of the Primarch project, told to Magister Sibyl Neasta, a dying astropath who had served him for centuries. As Sibyl lay dying, terrified that the Horus Heresy meant the failure of everything the Imperium had worked for, Malcador told her a truth so shocking that it recontextualizes the entire setting. Quote from Malcador, First Lord of the Imperium. Would it comfort you if I were to say the Primarchs, all of them, are but a means to an end? The Imperium is not for the post-humans, but for mankind. You know this. You helped me to manage them, to direct their efforts. The legions and their sires are conquerors' tools and nothing more. He continued, like them, burning brightly but briefly. But the Emperor and I could not conduct the Great Crusade with gene-enhanced mortals. We needed something greater, something stronger to reclaim the stars, and in order to control it, we needed a lifespan of the Legion Astartes that had nothing to do with aging or timed infirmity. Believe me when I say it, Sibyl Neasta, this was always intended to be the final act of the crusade. We wanted the Primarchs to turn against one another, against their father. Let me repeat that, because it's important. According to Malcador, the Horus Heresy wasn't a disaster. It was the plan. Be assured, we maneuvered each of them from the moment of their rediscovery, pitting them against each other, stoking their brotherly rivalries with his unequal favor. It was not difficult, no more so than positioning pieces on a Cheops board. Those who could not be managed, well, they would never reach the end game. The Primarchs were always meant to destroy each other. The Emperor and Malcador deliberately fostered resentment between them. They played favorites. They created situations where the Primarchs would come to hate each other. The entire project, creating 20 demigod sons, spreading them across the galaxy, reuniting them with their father, all of it was designed to culminate in a war that would eliminate the Primarchs and their legions. Why? Because, like the Thunder Warriors before them, the Space Marines and their Primarchs were too dangerous to be allowed to exist once their purpose was fulfilled. They were conquerors, not administrators. Warriors, not peacekeepers. And an empire built on endless warfare isn't an empire. It's just conquest with extra steps. But here's where Malcador admits their failure. My failure was in underestimating the true enemy. The ruinous powers have emboldened their champions among the 18, and the war began before we were ready. And so, every toll of that bell gives me pause to question, was this death one we intended, or yet another innocent soul I might have saved? That is my burden to bear. The Chaos Gods jumped the timeline. The heresy happened too early, before the Emperor and Malcador had properly positioned all their pieces. Instead of a controlled culling of the Primarchs and legions, they got a galaxy-spanning civil war that nearly destroyed everything. Now, here's the critical question. Was Malcador telling the truth? He himself acknowledged this might be a lie when he told Sibyl, "I lie to them to spare their sorrow, even as I envy their mortality. And it breaks my heart." It breaks my heart. Was this confession true, or was it a final comfort to a dying servant, making her believe that even this disaster was part of a greater plan? We may never know for certain. But consider, Malcador was willing to tell this to Sibyl on her deathbed. He was willing to let her die, believing that billions had perished as part of a deliberate imperial strategy. That level of cold calculation, that willingness to accept such terrible costs, tells us something profound about the kind of man Malcador was. To truly understand Malcador, we must examine his relationship with Ael Wyntor, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Sigillite's character and the clearest window into the weight he carried. During the Emperor's Webway project, Malcador encountered a dying Eldar in the abandoned passages beneath Terra. Rather than let this Xenos die, Malcador saw an opportunity. He took the Eldar's consciousness, stripped away the purely alien aspects, merged it with human genetics, and created Ael Wyntor, a hybrid being that was neither fully Eldar nor fully human. Why would Malcador do this? According to his own words to Wyntor, "I made you so I would have a voice that was not an echo of my own." stripped the alien from that corpse, merged it with something more akin to man. And you've been that for a long time, Ael. A good friend. Haven't we been good friends? Malcador needed someone he could talk to, someone he could confess his secrets to, someone who could bear witness to the terrible things he'd done and the terrible burdens he carried. But he couldn't use a normal human for this purpose. They wouldn't have the psychological resilience. So he created a hybrid with Eldar emotional strength. And it still wasn't enough. I know, and that is why you killed yourself so many times. Hundreds of you, seeking death rather than live with what I told them. Another secret I kept. Think about what this means. An Eldar consciousness, a species known for incredible emotional depth and psychological resilience, was driven to suicide by Malcador's confessions. Not once, not twice, hundreds of times. Each time Wyntor killed himself, Malcador would clone him again, using degrading genetic material. Each iteration lasted a shorter time than the one before, and each time Malcador would confess again, unload his burdens again, and watch as this created being chose death over living with that knowledge. Quote from the buried dagger, "I regret it." The Sigillite said the words like he meant them. But my need was greater than yours. Even I cannot carry my duty alone. So you helped me, my friend. You gave the Keeper of Terra's secrets a place where he could put aside his mask, even for a brief time, and confide. He bowed his head. I know the toll is great, but you have my deepest gratitude. This is perhaps the clearest demonstration of who Malcador really was. He created a sentient being specifically to serve as his confessor, knowing that the act of confession would drive that being to suicide, and then repeatedly cloned and recreated that being to continue the cycle. He did this hundreds of times. He regretted it. He acknowledged it was terrible, but his need was greater, so he did it anyway. This is the pragmatism of the Sigillite in its purest form, acknowledging the cost, feeling genuine remorse, and doing it anyway, because the alternative, carrying those burdens alone, would mean failure in his duty to Terra and the Emperor. While Malcador's public role was as the First Lord of Terra and the Emperor's chief administrator, he held another title in secret, Grand Master of Assassins. The Officio Assassinorum, the Imperium's network of specialized killers, answered directly to Malcador. He commanded the Vindicare snipers, the Eversaw berserkers, the Calidus shapeshifters, and the Calexus blanks. When the Imperium needed someone dead and conventional warfare wouldn't work, Malcador was the one who decided how, when, and who would carry out the execution. During the Horus Heresy, Malcador used his assassins extensively, attempting multiple times to kill Horus himself. He even dispatched the first-ever execution force, a team combining assassins from multiple temples for maximum effectiveness. Several of these attempts came close to succeeding, but ultimately all failed. Eventually, the Emperor himself ordered Malcador to stop the assassination attempts. Why? The Emperor had seen that Horus's death by assassination wouldn't end the heresy. It would only make a martyr of the War Master and potentially strengthen Chaos's hold on the traitor legions. The Emperor needed to face Horus directly, to break him spiritually as well as physically, to show that Chaos could not triumph even through its greatest champion. But Malcador's role as Master of Assassins shows us another aspect of his character. He was willing to use the dirtiest tools available. While the Emperor led crusades with banners flying and legions marching, Malcador sent individuals into the dark to murder targets in their sleep, to poison drinking water, to infiltrate and destroy from within. This is the man who understood that empire, true empire, isn't built just on glory and conquest. It's built on intelligence networks, on surgical removal of threats, on doing the things that can never be spoken of in official histories. Very soon after the outbreak of the heresy, the Emperor gave Malcador a directive: assemble men of character, skill, and determination, who would be tested and trained to become an elite group of investigators with the task of rooting out treachery and heresy. This marked the founding of the Imperial Inquisition, an organization that would go on to define the Imperium's response to internal threats for the next 10,000 years. Among the first Malcador approached for this duty were Death Guard hero Nathaniel Garrow and former sons of Horus, Captain Iacton Cruz. Malcador saw what others didn't, that the heresy wasn't just about military might or psychic power. It was about corruption that could hide in the hearts of loyal servants, about treachery that could sleep dormant for decades before revealing itself, about threats that required investigation and intelligence rather than just firepower. The Inquisition would become the Imperium's immune system, identifying and destroying threats before they could metastasize. But like Malcador himself, the Inquisition would operate in moral gray zones. They would sacrifice innocents to save millions. They would use the tools of the enemy, diamonds, forbidden knowledge, alien technology, in service of humanity's survival. In creating the Inquisition, Malcador essentially created a reflection of himself, pragmatic to the point of ruthlessness, willing to bear terrible burdens for the greater good, operating in shadows so that others could live in the light. Parallel to founding the Inquisition, Malcador recruited a special group known as his Knights Errant. Space Marines hand-picked from both Loyalist and traitor legions who would serve him directly in the war against chaos. These were Marines like Garviel Loken, sole survivor of Istvan III's betrayal, Nathaniel Garrow, Death Guard who rejected Mortarian's corruption, Tylos Rubio, a librarian when librarians were banned, even former Traitor Legion Marines who had remained loyal despite their Primarch's fall to chaos. Malcador saw potential in these individuals that went beyond their combat capabilities. They were warriors who had seen the face of chaos and not been seduced. They had made choices, often terrible, costly choices, to remain loyal when betrayal would have been easier. They understood the true nature of the enemy in ways that sheltered loyalists never could. The Knights Errant carried out special missions for Malcador throughout the heresy: assassination attempts, intelligence gathering, rescue operations, and tasks that couldn't be entrusted to regular forces. They operated outside the normal chain of command, answering only to Malcador himself. But their ultimate purpose was even greater than their wartime service. Malcador's greatest achievement, the culmination of his strategic thinking, was the creation of the Grey Knights, a Space Marine chapter dedicated entirely to fighting chaos, incorruptible by design, existing outside the normal command structure of the Imperium. During the darkest days of the heresy, Malcador brought his most trusted Knights Errant before the Emperor himself. 8 Space Marines from both Loyalist and Traitor legions, given new names to symbolize their rebirth: Janius, Epithemius, Chiron, Koios, Ogun, Iapto, Jotun, and Satra. Plus humans like Kyril Sindaman, Lemuel Gorman, and Amendera Kendall, who would become the first Inquisitors. The Emperor surveyed these chosen recruits and gave his approval for Malcador's plan. Malcador took the 8 Space Marines to Titan, Saturn's moon, where he had already prepared a fortress monastery stocked with everything necessary to create a new chapter of Space Marines, including gene seeds suspected to have been taken from the Emperor himself, Then Malcador performed perhaps his greatest feat of psychic power. Using methods provided by Ael Wyntor, he hid Titan away from the ravages of the heresy by placing it inside the warp itself, protected by macro-Geller fields and sigillic rites. While the final battles of the heresy raged in real space, Titan existed in a time-dilated bubble within the warp. By the time it re-emerged into the materium after Horus's defeat, an army of 1,000 Grey Knight battle brothers had been trained and equipped, a chapter that would spend the next 10,000 years as humanity's ultimate defense against demonic incursion. The Grey Knights were incorruptible by design. No Grey Knight has ever fallen to chaos in 10,000 years of fighting the worst the warp can offer. This wasn't just because of their training or their gene seed. It was because Malcador built into their very essence protections that made them anathema to corruption. In creating the Grey Knights, Malcador ensured that even after his death, even after the Emperor's entombment, the Imperium would have a weapon specifically designed to counter the threat that nearly destroyed it. It was his final gift to humanity, and perhaps his greatest legacy. As Horus's forces approached Terra for the final confrontation, Malcador's power and health began to visibly deteriorate. The man who had appeared frail as a deliberate disguise was now genuinely dying, the weight of his psychic exertions and his ancient age finally catching up to him. Malcador attended war councils alongside Rogel Dawn, Sanguinius, Jagatai Khan, and Constantin Valdor, helping coordinate Terra's defense despite his declining condition. When Janitia Krola, the head of the Sisters of Silence, was present, her blank aura would negate his psychic disguise, revealing just how sick and ragged the Sigillite had become. But Malcador still had crucial roles to play. When Magnus the Red and select Thousand Sons infiltrated the Imperial Palace, Malcador confronted them in the subterranean depths beneath the palace. He attempted to turn Magnus back to the Imperial cause, even revealing that the lost shard of Magnus on Terra was now beyond the Crimson King's reach, having been implanted into Janus, who would become the first Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights. Magnus, enraged by this revelation, seemingly killed Malcador. Only the sacrifice of Olivia Sureka, another perpetual who transferred her life essence to him, saved the Sigillite at the cost of her own life. This sacrifice left Malcador carrying a deep despair, one more burden added to the weight of thousands he already bore. Then came Malcador's ultimate test, when the Emperor decided he must face Horus directly aboard the vengeful spirit. Someone needed to take his place on the Golden Throne, providing the psychic power necessary to hold back the demonic invasion through the Shattered Webway project. The Emperor's original choice for this duty had been Magnus, who possessed the psychic might to handle the throne's demands. But Magnus had turned traitor, joining Horus. That left only one alternative, Malcador himself. Quote from The End and the Death. Though he was a powerful psyker in his own right, Malcador's mental powers were nothing compared to that of the Emperor, and could not last long upon the throne. However, Malcador willingly took his place upon the Soul Engine, much to the despair of his old friend the Emperor, who declared Malcador the Sigillite will now forever be known as Malcador the Hero. Sitting on the Golden Throne was torture beyond description. The device was designed to channel the psychic might of the Emperor himself, a being of godlike power. Malcador, despite being the second most powerful human psyker, was like a candle trying to replace the sun. His body immediately began breaking down under the strain. His flesh started to burn away, but he held on, channeling every ounce of his power into keeping the webway sealed, keeping Terra safe from demonic invasion, while the Emperor fought Horus, Even while his body was being consumed by the throne, Malcador faced another assault. Horus used his sorcery to invade Malcador's mind, showing him the plight of imperial attackers aboard the vengeful spirit, trying to break his concentration or simply torment him in his final moments. But Malcador persevered. Despite his agony, despite his body literally dissolving, he sent psychic guidance to imperial heroes like Garviel Loken as they fought their way through the vengeful spirit toward Lupercal's court. When Horus was finally slain, and Rogel Dorn and Constantin Valdor brought the Emperor's shattered body back to the throne, Malcador finally allowed himself to let go. His body had long since been reduced to dust, but he had retained his soul to power the throne through sheer force of will alone. As Malcador's soul fizzled out, he bid goodbye to his oldest friend and expressed hope that fragments of himself would live on for a time in both the Golden Throne and his chosen. He acknowledged that the foundations of the Imperium were no longer himself and the Emperor. The Imperium would have to stand on its own now. To understand Malcador's significance, we must understand his capabilities. He was the most powerful human psyker in the galaxy, after the Emperor and, potentially, Magnus the Red. And that power manifested in ways that few could match. During the Great Crusade, Horus attempted to utter the name of one of the lost Primarchs in Malcador's presence. The Sigillite instantly incapacitated the War Master with his psychic abilities, reverting into what was described as a deep, dark rage, complete with a rictus grin that was described as an older, familiar rage. Think about that. Horus Lupercal, the greatest of the Primarchs, was casually shut down by Malcador when he overstepped boundaries that the Sigillite had set. This tells us that Malcador's power wasn't just raw psychic might. It was refined, controlled, and backed by knowledge of how to use it effectively. During the humiliation of the word-bearers at Monarchia, Lorgar, enraged at the destruction of his perfect city, backhanded Malcador with enough force to send him flying 20 meters through the air. He landed on broken ground with impact that should have killed any normal human. Malcador survived with only a few broken bones. Then he telekinetically retrieved his fallen staff and rose to continue the confrontation. This physical resilience was unnatural for someone who appeared as a frail old man. Another demonstration that Malcador's apparent weakness was largely theatrical. Malcador wore an archaeotech collar capable of generating powerful force fields that could redirect enemy attacks back at them. His staff could unleash waves of nuclear fire when necessary, though Malcador insisted it was a tool rather than a weapon. His greatest feat of psychic power was hiding Titan in the warp during the Heresy, using macro-Geller fields and sigillic rites to protect an entire moon from corruption, while time passed differently within. When Titan emerged, centuries had passed within, while only months had passed outside, time enough to train 1,000 Grey Knights. So who was Malcador really? Was he the hero that the Emperor proclaimed him to be in his final moments? Or was he, as Zograroth 666 suggests, evidence that the Emperor himself was always darker than official history admits? Let's examine the evidence. Malcador may have committed terrible atrocities during Old Night, as Brahm al-Khadour created a sentient being, Wyntor, specifically to serve as his confessor, knowing it would drive that being to suicide hundreds of times. Admitted that he and the Emperor deliberately orchestrated the Primarch's mutual hatred. Claimed the Horus Heresy was always the intended endpoint of the Primarch project. Founded the Inquisition, an organization that would go on to authorize planetary genocide in the name of purity. served as Grand Master of Assassins, directing countless deaths from the shadows, consistently prioritized the survival of humanity over the lives and autonomy of individuals. But consider also that he saved humanity from demonic invasion during the siege by sacrificing himself on the Golden Throne, created the Grey Knights, humanity's ultimate defense against chaos, founded institutions like the Administratum that allowed the Imperium to function, carried terrible burdens alone rather than sharing them and risking others' corruption, showed genuine remorse for his actions while still doing what he believed necessary, was the Emperor's closest friend and most trusted advisor for thousands of years. The truth is that Malcador embodies the central moral question of Warhammer 40,000. Is it acceptable to commit terrible acts in service of survival? Can good ends justify evil means? At what point does the cost become too high? Malcador believed the answer was clear. Humanity's survival justified any cost, any sacrifice, any atrocity. He would bear the burden of those choices, carry the weight of those sins, but he would not falter in his duty. Zogroroth 666's observation is particularly insightful here. The name Malcador can be interpreted as evil befallen or fallen to evil in Latin. If this etymology is intentional, and in Warhammer 40K names are rarely accidental, it suggests that even the creators of the setting saw darkness at Malcador's core. The fact that an Eldar consciousness, a species known for incredible emotional resilience, was driven to suicide hundreds of times by Malcador's confessions speaks volumes. What could be so terrible that even an alien mind, capable of processing millennia of experience, couldn't bear it? Perhaps the most damning piece of evidence is Malcador's own words to dying Sibyl Niasta. I lie to them to spare their sorrow, even as I envy their mortality, and it breaks my heart. He envied mortality. He envied the ability to die and escape the burden of his knowledge and actions. An immortal who yearns for death. What does that tell us about the weight he carried? 10,000 years after his death, Malcador's influence remains fundamental to the Imperium's function, for better and worse. The Administratum he founded has grown into a bloated nightmare of bureaucracy, where paperwork can take decades to process, and entire planets can be lost in filing errors. But it still functions, still coordinates the logistics of a million-world empire, still manages to keep supplies flowing to armies fighting on distant frontiers. It's inefficient, corrupt, and hideously wasteful. But it works, which is more than can be said for most galactic empires. The Inquisition operates exactly as Malcador designed it, ruthlessly pragmatic, willing to sacrifice anything for humanity's survival, operating in moral grey zones that would horrify civilians. They've saved countless worlds from chaos corruption. They've also destroyed countless worlds on suspicion alone. Malcador would probably approve of both. The Grey Knights remain incorruptible after 10,000 years of fighting the worst horrors the warp can manifest. They are precisely what Malcador intended, humanity's ultimate defense against demonic invasion. That success rate, 0 Grey Knights ever falling to chaos, justifies everything Malcador put into their creation. And the Golden Throne itself, where Malcador spent his final moments, still houses the Emperor's shattered form. The device Malcador held together through sheer will, buying time for the Emperor to be interred, still maintains the Astronomicon that guides ships through the warp. His sacrifice made that possible. But perhaps Malcador's greatest legacy is the philosophical framework of the Imperium itself, that humanity's survival justifies any cost, that sacrifice is not just acceptable but mandatory, that the individual matters far less than the species. This mindset has allowed the Imperium to survive for 10,000 years in a galaxy trying to kill it. It's also created a regime of unimaginable cruelty, where human life is the cheapest commodity, and freedom is a forgotten dream. Malcador would look at the modern Imperium, its brutality, its stagnation, its cruelty, and probably recognize it as the inevitable result of the systems he created. Would he be proud, horrified, resigned? Perhaps all three. As Zograroth 666 astutely observes, understanding Malcador helps us understand the Emperor himself. Because Malcador was not just a servant, he was a friend, a partner, a reflection of the Emperor's own pragmatism. Everything Malcador did, he did with the Emperor's knowledge and approval. When he founded the Assassins, the Emperor knew. When he created the Inquisition, the Emperor authorized it. When he manipulated the Primarchs against each other, the Emperor was his co-conspirator. The Emperor, that figure presented in imperial propaganda as humanity's savior and protector, worked alongside a man who committed atrocities during Old Night terrible enough to drive witnesses to suicide. The Emperor trusted that man, made him the architect of the Imperium, gave him authority second only to his own. What does that tell us about the Emperor? The master of mankind is either unaware of Malcador's true nature and past, unlikely given his psychic power, aware but willing to overlook it for the greater good, pragmatic but morally compromising, complicit in or even supportive of Malcador's darkest actions, which suggests the Emperor's own darkness. The grimdark truth that Zograroth 666 highlights is this: the Emperor has always been darker than the Imperium admits. The good guy narrative is propaganda. The Emperor is willing to sacrifice anything, billions of lives, his own sons, his closest friend, basic human dignity, for his vision of humanity's future. Malcador wasn't a good man corrupted by circumstance. He was a practical man who understood that in a hostile universe, survival requires compromises that would horrify those with the luxury of moral certitude, and the Emperor chose this man as his right hand precisely because he understood and shared that philosophy. The Imperium wasn't built on hope and heroism. It was built on calculated atrocity, on deliberate manipulation, on systems designed by men who had committed horrors they couldn't even speak about without driving others to madness. And it worked. For 10,000 years, through the Long War, through countless invasions and insurrections, through being assailed on all sides by enemies that should have destroyed it centuries ago, the Imperium has survived. Malcador and the Emperor built something terrible, but they built something that lasts. Malcador the Sigillite died as dust on the Golden Throne, his body consumed by power beyond his capacity to channel, his soul finally released after 6,700 years of bearing unbearable burdens. The Emperor proclaimed him Malcador the Hero in recognition of his final sacrifice. But heroism is complicated in Warhammer 40,000. Malcador saved humanity through his sacrifice on the throne. He also may have orchestrated manipulations that led to billions of deaths. He created institutions that protected the Imperium. Those same institutions have committed atrocities that would shame the worst tyrants of old Earth. He confessed sins so terrible that an Eldar consciousness chose death hundreds of times, rather than live with knowledge of them. He also carried those burdens alone, rather than corrupting others with that knowledge. Was Malcador the Sigillite a hero? A monster? A necessary evil? A tragic figure who did terrible things for good reasons? The answer is probably yes to all of these. Once again, I want to thank Zogroroth666 for providing the extensive research that made this video possible. His insights into the darker aspects of Malcador's character and the implications for the Emperor himself have added depth to this exploration that I couldn't have achieved alone. The 40K community's dedication to examining these complex moral questions is what makes the setting so compelling. In the end, Malcador represents what makes Warhammer 40,000 great. Moral complexity that doesn't provide easy answers. He's not a villain you can simply hate or a hero you can simply admire. He's a figure who forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the price of survival and the nature of necessary evil. The Imperium he helped build stumbles forward into its 42nd millennium, still guided by institutions he created, still following philosophies he championed, still bearing the weight of compromises he made. For good or ill, the Imperium is Malcador's legacy as much as it is the Emperor's. And somewhere in that legacy, in the Grey Knights who've never fallen, in the Inquisitors who root out corruption, in the administratum that somehow keeps 1,000,000 worlds functioning, Malcador's fragments live on, just as he hoped they would in his final moments. The question we're left with isn't whether Malcador was good or evil. It's whether we can accept that sometimes, in a sufficiently hostile universe, the difference doesn't matter. What matters is what you build, what you protect, and what you're willing to sacrifice, including your own soul, to ensure that humanity survives one more day. Malcador understood that. He lived it for 6,700 years, and in his final moment, burning to nothing on the Golden Throne, he proved he meant it. That's today's deep dive into one of the most complex figures in Warhammer 40,000. I hope this examination of Malcador the Sigillite has given you new appreciation for the moral complexity that makes the setting so compelling. What are your thoughts on Malcador? Hero? Monster? Tragic figure? Necessary evil? And what do his actions tell us about the Emperor himself? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing different perspectives on these morally complex characters. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to subscribe to the LORELORD for more explorations of Warhammer 40,000's darkest corners. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future lore videos. Special thanks again to Zogroroth666 for his invaluable contributions to this video. The 40K community's dedication to diving deep into the lore is what makes content like this possible. This is the LORELORD, reminding you that in the grim darkness of the far future, even the heroes have sins that would drive witnesses mad. Sometimes that's what it takes to survive. Until next time, keep seeking the lore, and remember, the Imperium was built on secrets that were never meant to be told.